everyone. Thank you for coming tonight.
I didn't realize we were going to get these couches up here like this.
I know. I'm going to fall asleep. But I won't. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Petra, for asking me to moderate this. And congratulations on a beautiful book.
Thanks.
I want to start, we'll talk for a bit and then there will be audience questions at the end. But in this book, it's obviously we work together and we are friends, and I knew it would be beautiful, but I didn't anticipate how much you would share of yourself and your story in the writing. You talk about your family and certain challenges you faced as a teenager, and you kind of create, the narrative kind of emerges from all the photos you've taken since you started. And at what point did that kind of storyline become clear, and did you decide you wanted to include that along with the photos?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like it sort of came at the end, which is was interesting. I wasn't sure originally what I was going to do with the book. Loren and I, at first I thought I was going to create new work and have this book of all new work, and then I realized that I hadn't properly told my story, and that I've had these images out on the internet for years and have been speaking about myself and others for years, but I hadn't really delved into what each photo meant and each stage in my life meant. And then as I was putting it together, I never realized the power that I had behind the camera and how that affected each photo and how each sort of year had changed and how each year sort of changed my photography because of what I was going through. And so while I was putting the book together, I was putting this narrative together and connecting what had happened in my life to the images. And by the end, I realized that it was a full story with an arc, which is so crazy. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some of them you described that you took in high school, some of your first photos of other young girls, you describe in retrospect as sexualized or even violent in how sexualized they are. And it seems totally unconventional and very brave to me for someone in their own book to look back on their own work and point out things that, instead of just being here's all my great work, and I meant for all of it to look this way, and it was all intentional. Not only do you share very personal, vulnerable things, but you're also kind of self-critical in that way. And did you ever second guess that, or why did you want to have that much look at your earlier work with a kind of critical eye?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's important as an artist to do that, but I think it was also important as a woman and a person for me to do that and to see what I was actually doing to create those images, because there is a large difference between my images now and in the past, and especially my first ones when I was 15. I was so confused by my body. I hated my body. I hated everyone. I hated how people looked at my body. I hated how people didn't look at my body, and it was something that sort of became very violent, and that ended up kind of taking a lot of life in my images, and I thought it was important to note that, because I think that's what makes a great artist or a great person, is to look at your flaws and your everything. Mm-hmm. And that's what that's always sort of what I've lived by. It's you really, I don't know, I really needed to see all those faults to sort of move ahead, because otherwise what other work can I create if I can't critically look at my work?
And from this might be a really silly question that I just don't understand because I'm not a photographer, but you just have made so many things. How did you even begin and like there's a lot that isn't in this book, which already feels very full.
Yeah.
Like if I'd had this job, I would not have known where to begin with your work. How did you even go about all of your personal photos, the candids, your rookie stuff, everything you shot on the road?
I don't know. I guess also like while I'm taking photos, I'm constantly editing too. I mean, we really cut, this is Lauren, my editor is right here, but we really cut down a lot of images. I wanted it super full, and then we realized that it was a little more, it was prettier with less. But even when it was full, that was like maybe only half my work. But I guess it, I love the laughing at. Yeah, I guess, I mean, it was just always part of my process, and it was like the process of storytelling for me too. Because each image, I mean, I can take a role and I can see which image to me has the most feeling in it. As I've like, I guess grown older, I've like been taking photos longer, I've really, really realized of how much my emotions have an impact on the imagery itself. So when I see a photo where I can kind of remember what I was thinking or remember that moment or that thought, those are the ones that kind of made it in the book. Like there's this one of you in your bathroom. But I just remember it was after a really big life event for you, and it and it was, and you're just standing against the bathroom sink, but it was just like that like snippet or that thing that I would never unsee or that would never happen again that I just really remember. It was like literally you breathing in, and I took a photo. And yeah.
I have to go. Well, you do say in the book that you are really drawn to subjects who you feel have stories kind of built into them, not always models. Often your sister, obviously, but also her friends.
Yeah.
And now you do a lot more fashion and editorial and campaigns. And when you're given a celebrity whose story has been so documented and who, you know, is kind of by necessity very in control of their story, how do you honor that and help us to see them in a new way?
Well, I mean, it's sort of, celebrities are just like us, but
so true.
But literally when you meet someone, you already have this story made up about them. Like any subject that I have or any person or friend, I always like already have a narrative to them. And what's exciting is finding out what their actual story is or how they actually feel or and that's why, I mean, for me, it's even more exciting, not more exciting, but it's fun shooting these celebrities or personalities because like their narrative is already so written. So it's so fun to like see them in person and see if that checks out or not. And then to also see what I can pull out of them, because the way that I shoot is very intimate. I like to get really close with my subjects, and I like for them to have like the most control of the camera. So I feel like there isn't much of a difference between doing that and doing the stuff that I was doing before, because I just approach it the same way. Yeah.
You're so smart. Made the question seem so dumb.
What?
Just kidding. No, just because when you said it, I was like, of course, you just treat it the same way. And then whatever. It's all good. So when you've established this aesthetic that is very iconographic and very you. And how do you, like, even when I see something that I don't know is yours, I know that it's yours.
It's crazy.
And once you've done that, how do you, and you're known for a certain thing, and I would imagine when you're hired for jobs, people want that thing. How do you develop as an artist and avoid just self-imitating?
I mean, I think for me, because I started when I was 15, and I've always sort of created artwork as like a way to live, basically. So everything that I've created is out of like my gut, and the only way that I can keep moving is learning, which is like, I don't know. I remember when I went to school for 2 years for criticism and curatorial practice, and I was really intent on doing it because I wanted to learn about, I wanted to learn about everything, but I also knew that strengthening my other mediums in my life would help photography. So I think the only way to grow is to learn. I know that's like so simple, but it literally is that. It's
Right.
like, if I don't look outside of myself, or if I don't read, or if I don't see what's going on in the world, then I can't create new work, or I can't create work that evolves.
What were those other mediums?
Curate, I don't know if curating is necessarily a medium, but I always really, I come from a ballet background, and that was like, dance was such a big thing in my life. And there was like video and painting, and it was sort of not necessarily like having those ever be shown, but it was doing those and reading, and also being able to see work next to other work. I don't know. I really was really happy with my schooling and my professors in Toronto, because a lot of the work that we were doing was curating for change. So curating to like create a different space or to create a different narrative. And that really taught me how to look at my artwork in relation to others and in relation to the world. But
What are you learning from, reading, taking in, absorbing right now?
It's funny, I've been doing a lot of self-reflection and like help, or not self-help, but I guess, I don't know, I come from a background in mental illness and a family with a background in mental illness, and this past year I had kind of a rough year, but my main thing is figuring out how my brain works and how my traumas have affected that and have affected my behavior. And that's weirdly like where I'm at in my life. I sort of never, until this, it's funny that this book has come along, and then I sort of started that like self recovery, but it's really that was really looking inward, because I feel like after doing all this stuff that was so putting everything out, I wanted to really look at it and identify what my feelings were. Because I don't know, I guess I've always repressed a lot of my feelings, and through photography I was able to like kind of express them. But now, like with writing and this and everything, it's kind of what I'm doing.
Actually, a few days ago, when I asked what you wanted to talk about tonight, you mentioned mental illness. And your series, 24-Hour Psycho, is in this book. You also took photos of Selena Gomez this summer, just after she was dispatched from the hospital. And in a visual medium like photography, how do you deal with that subject matter without romanticizing or aestheticizing it?
That I don't know. I just like try to do what I do. But for me, it was all, creating these images was all about being able to, I guess, find yourself or find a place in them. Because I grew up a very depressed and confused and sad young girl, and I kind of never felt like it was okay to be that. And I think a lot of people do, and don't think that it's okay to have these things, or to even feel anger, which is like something that's like very new to me, and I feel like a lot of people. But so I wanted to, with 24-Hour Psycho, I wanted to create these colorful, bold, like bright, sort of like, I always use violence. Funny that I go back to the word violence. Images that when I had them in a show, I had them printed very large. So you're sort of like, you're confronted with these beautiful images of women kind of feeling. And I mean, that to me, I don't know if it's hard. It's a very thin line between like romanticizing it and displaying it. But I think that just sort of comes with viewership and the context of which it's shown in. And I think with this book, it's like I write, a lot of the writing has to do with the horrible and like hard things in my life. So I don't think that the images would necessarily be like something that you would want to romanticize. But there's something that hopefully empower you or make you feel something. Yeah.
I also think like there are certain things that just because photography or film or fiction like are so kind of inherently romantic, it can be hard to avoid. Like I have definitely used like one thing that you talk about in the book is as a young woman being, you know, self-identifying as a feminist while in a relationship with someone who is much older than you that was not healthy, but you thought of yourself as a feminist. So what you were doing was fine and healthy. And you say like Elvis married Priscilla when she was 14, and you know, you were kind of raised, first of all, it was the early 2000s, so to be sexy meant to look like a weird baby, but also that hasn't really changed.
Yeah.
But there's more of an antidote now. But also like, you know, I've been in experiences with that and been like, no, it's like Manhattan, the Woody Allen movie. And I'm like, oh yeah, the Woody Allen movie. Like, but even if something is so obviously not necessarily healthy or good for you, even if you can find a cultural touchstone, even if, you know, the point of Lolita is not that he's a great guy, it's very hard to get away from the things that those works of art make you feel. And even if you are such a like dutiful feminist, at some point you need to kind of know what it's like to not be that way.
I mean, not even that. I think it's part of being human is like making mistakes and also having these dark moments. I really don't see a fault in them, and I don't think that that should be part of the narrative of being a feminist. And I think that we should be able to be both things. Like I think we should be able to enjoy the things that are bad and as well as like enjoy the things that are good. But I forget the question because I just got so passionate about that.
I don't think I asked a question.
Yeah, it wasn't a question, but it was it wasn't a question.
Not a question.
Not a question. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe ask a question.
Okay. Cool.
But I think I sort of answered the non-question though, right?
It's all a conversation.
Yeah, okay.
Women can be both things. Check. Yeah. But I do think, I mean, you know, sometimes your work is described as like the female gaze.
Yeah.
One thing you point out in this book is that when you were younger, it was more like the male gaze as a, you know, product of your environment. And I think that sometimes when people hear female work or feminist work, they expect to see like a Dove campaign that's like a girl with pimples like winning an Olympic medal.
Yeah.
Which would be fine and cool and great. But when you make something that's like descriptive and really just a record of where you are in that moment, where other girls are, rather than prescriptive and like, this is what, you know, in a utopia we would be doing and how we would look, I think it can be confusing to people. And since you were given that label so early on, in addition to identifying as a feminist yourself, how do you see that label or movement in your work now?
Yeah, it's funny because feminism was always like a lens, obviously, at how I looked at the world, but it also, for me, I always made sure I allowed for like myself and my mistakes and my, I guess, knowledge of the world, because I mean, when I started, or when I was 15 or 14 or whatever, I grew up with such a strong sense that how I looked was my entire being and was what I was worth. And coming from that doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily create imagery that is going to be positive. I was very angry and I was very confused, and just because I like wanted equality didn't necessarily mean that I could right away create work that was, I mean, I would say all my work is I don't know, I would say all my work is feminist, and I am a feminist, but it's not necessarily in that one narrative of feminism. So like from the work, or when I was 15 and shooting these girls, like I was looking at, it was funny, I was looking, which is why it was a nice like 180, or I don't know, really bad at math here, but was a nice return now recently to moving into creating sort of like horror films and things. But at that time I was looking at like The Exorcist and Carrie and these movies that really felt like my experience as a young girl. And it's funny because with Carrie specifically, I feel like it just sums up the experience, because the movie starts, I mean, it's made by a man, and the movie starts with Carrie in the shower with this beautiful, sexy music. And it's this it's horrifying for me now, because it's this young girl who's, I don't know how old she's like 14, 15 in it, but it's basically like sexualizing her. So it starts off by like, she's like in the shower, this beautiful music is playing, and then and so you're kind of confused in the beginning, where you're like, am I looking at her as a sexual object? And then it turns into her bleeding and screaming. Mm-hmm. And that was always sort of such a great metaphor for my life, where I was just like, it really spoke to me. And I was like, because as a young person, I did want to be looked at, and I did want to be attractive, but I also didn't want the attention, like abusive attention, or like unwanted attention, or even, I don't know, it's so confusing. It's not black and white. And so the images that I started to create weren't black and white. They were sometimes like maybe too sexual, maybe too over the line, and maybe too male gazy, but that's like how I had to start. And that's still something that I go through. It's not like I'm fully okay with myself, because I'm not. And that's also another thing that I really think is important for me as like a person, or as like a person on social media, is to like, not to be like, I hate myself too, but but to be like, it's normal, and yeah, it's just something that like we all have to work through. Like as much as I'm like, love yourself, don't do that. Don't do this. I would never say don't do this. As much as I say that, it's like I struggle with it like a million times more. I don't know. But yeah.
I think that's very relatable. But it's true. It's also funny how The Exorcist and Carrie, like, all that really happens in those movies is that a girl goes through puberty.
Yeah.
I mean, she's possessed by the devil, whatever. But the version of that is like she starts masturbating, and the mom is like, oh.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so great about The Exorcist. It's like she's basically just like, it's such a crazy story, because she's basically just going through puberty, and she starts like, I forget if she like touches herself, or if she's like, she says something. She's like, fuck me or something, right? Yeah.
Yeah. She says a lot of things.
Yeah, she says a lot of things, but it's just like everyone is so shocked, and I just love how the end is like 3 men in the room with her, like trying to get her to like not be like that.
Right.
And it's very poignant.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah. But
they're like, okay, when we make a horror movie about a dude, like, what makes men scary? Ooh, when they're murderers. Girls become scary when they get their period. Like, it's so, yeah, it's interesting. Men, culture. You, as I mentioned, you have this like signature aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
You have like naturally that inspires a lot of young people and a lot of imitators, which I say not in a derogatory way, but when you're starting out as an artist, you imitate the people, writers, photographers, filmmakers, whatever, who you admire.
Yeah.
So when you were starting out, who did you imitate?
I mean, it's funny because I think I was imitating Ryan a lot. Not necessarily imitating, but I was
Ryan McGinley.
Yeah, Ryan McGinley. Sorry. But I was so taken aback by how he shot bodies. And I think it was important for me at that time to see bodies non-sexually. And that really excited me. And my photos don't really look like his, but it was a theme where I was like, oh, I can shoot bodies and it's not sexual. Like, there was literally that thought was what got me. And I mean, I think for me, it was more film that I looked at for inspiration. I was really, like, one of the first films that I really loved was Daisies, which I like watched on YouTube. And it was so wild. Like, I remember finding it and being like, what is this? And it really set the tone. Again, not that my work aesthetically looks like that, and maybe it did in the beginning, but it set the tone of like how playful I was with my photography and how playful I was with my subjects. Yeah.
One of your subjects, the most photographed subject, I was actually told that you had to edit down how much of her was in the book, is your sister Anna, who's on the cover. Obviously, you are sisters, but how has having a subject you have constant access to,
Yeah.
who you can go back to over so many years, impacted your growth as a photographer?
I mean, it's really crazy to have that. And I think because as a teenager, I wasn't living a teenage life, and having her, I mean, she wasn't either, but she was living one that was visually a little more teenage than mine. And to have that access to her and her friends was so important to my growth as a teenager, because I was able to like tag along to their prom or their parties and to all these moments that I felt like I never experienced, and also create those moments for them, because we were all, I mean, my sister and I have sort of been on our own for a bit, but we were all living in an adult world, but I was creating for them this teenage story that they were sort of living, but I think I made it even more of like a reality for them. So like the sun, I don't know, I just like catching those moments made it real for them, because by the time my sister was graduating high school, like I was already out of the house and she was already like taking care of me too. But it's just funny looking at the images together and being like her and I like collectively, because I had a really crazy imagination that I still have trouble defining what reality and my imagination is. But I mean, because art was such play for me, and because I did it at such a young age, Anna and I just continued to do that. So these images are very, I mean, they're so both of our worlds connecting and creating one for ourselves. And I mean, I always say, I feel like people always associate me and you as well with nostalgia, but I always say that it's not nostalgia for the past. It's nostalgia for things that have never happened in our lives. Because there's so many things that I haven't lived and that I wish I lived, and that I as an image maker can create. And that's sort of what I was doing with them, and that I still continue to do, and that I think is important to do, is to like put these moments into history that weren't captured that are now captured and that now can be part of that landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a lot of Rookie for me, even if it was through other people.
Yeah.
And I remember even a kid at my high school, my nemesis. It's fine, I'm over it. We're adults now. But but one time he was like, don't you think you're really trying to like force the whole teenager thing? And I was like, that's biologically impossible because I'm 17. Of course, I had to be like, according to my calculations, like I'm actually a teenager. But I think it's funny that you talk about it and say like, you know, we created things that felt teenage. Mm-hmm. Where does that like definition of, like you said, prom, these different milestones, but what makes up that definition of like teenage?
Yeah.
Or what informed that?
I mean, it was obviously like movies and TV and everything, but those were all missing that like, I mean, that dark side that both of us have or had. And I really, really wanted to incorporate that into my images because there were so few movies and so few whatever that displayed the teenage experiences I felt it. And I think that's what was so cool and so important for me with Rookie was like, wow, there's this space that like we can actually show the teenage experience in the like complexity that it is instead of this like one-dimensional thing. I mean, I was just speaking about it earlier, how Rookie was the space for me to like play and like really be like really create things that were different and to have a platform for them. So
that's sweet.
I just wanted to say that.
Oh, thank you. I don't think that's like all of my questions, but we're so let's open it up to the audience. Yeah. Oh, we're bringing you a mic.
Yeah. All right. So I was wondering what influences you took with the style of this book. Like, how did you realize the format? Why did you use 2 different kinds of paper? I really like that. Yeah, just your process.
Yeah, I love that you asked about the 2 different kinds of paper because that was actually a big, it was a really big thing. I wanted to start, I love printing photos on matte, and it's such a, I mean, for me, it's such an early way of looking at photos is that matte paper, and that took up half of the book where it's mostly like teenage and mostly my sort of like documentary style photos and my, I guess, I was going to say unprofessional work, but I feel like I've been a professional my whole life. But early work, there we go. And then there's actually a shift between horizontal and vertical, which is where I started. I mean, when I first started shooting, I would shoot horizontal, and that was because, I mean, I started shooting photos because I wanted to create movies, and photography was easier and cheaper, and as a young person, it's like, where am I going to get a crew of like 50 people or whatever? I guess I could make a small movie, but yeah, and then so I had only been used to shooting in that horizontal way, and when I started working in fashion and mainly working in fashion, I had to literally flip my camera because of the pages of the magazines, but it also just like shifted my brain, and I learned how to take portraits I got closer to my subjects. And so we kind of, with the glossy, it kind of like mimics, I mean, especially with the 24-hour psycho images, it sort of like mimics a more art-oriented or like more, I guess, glossy, kind of like exciting. They're both intimate, and it goes from 2 different kinds of intimate. So I think using the matte and the gloss, I don't know. Did I get there for you? Okay. Thank you.
So I will try to come around and we'll do a big loop of the room.
Hi.
Hi.
So you talk a lot about how like other photographers and filmmakers influenced you. Like, has music influenced you in any way?
Oh my
and
God.
like, how has that like and affected like the outcome of your pictures? Because I mean, I know you photograph a lot of musicians, and like I'm sure like working with them has been some sort of inspiration, but like I know for me, like when I take pictures, I listen to a lot of music, and that definitely translates into my work. So I was just kind of curious if that, like, what's your thought process if you're like listening to a song, you're like, oh my god, this is gonna like totally work in my picture. Or something.
It's funny. It's funny that you say that because it's something that I always forget to mention, but it's like literally one of the biggest parts of my life. Like I don't think I ever go an hour or whatever without listening to music. And like this is actually something that Tavi and I did when we went on our road trip. We're both so, I mean, I always see everything as a story, as an image, as whatever. So like when we were traveling across America, we made a playlist for each state because we had such specific thought and aesthetic, and music has like so greatly influenced me. And I listen to music when I'm shooting, and it's for myself and it's for my subjects, literally to a fault where people get so annoyed that I play the same song over and over and again. I remember when Nikes came out, and I would play it over and over and over again when I was shooting. At one point, my friend, who was a set designer, was like, "You really have to stop. It's really annoying." But for me, it got me so deep into that mood that I don't know, music's my life. I love music. But and then getting to work with these musicians who like it's funny, like when I was listening to a lot of Dev Hines' music.
Oh, yeah, I love it.
Yeah, but I met him and I was like, I play your music when I take photos, and he was like, it's crazy, I look at your photos and make music. So lame and nerdy of both of us, but that was like, it's really cool. And like that's what I've sort of like learned from a lot of musicians, that that visual and the sound, it's like it's one thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I feel like this kind of applies to you and Tavi, but I feel like both of your guys' work is like so grounded in the fact that you were both like very emotionally aware at like a very young age. And I guess I'm just wondering if like that came from self-education or like life experience or a combination. Like how did you get to that place where you could be so mature to the point where you were like making other teenagers be more self-aware?
That's really so sweet. I can't even handle that question, but I don't know.
I feel like I wasn't.
Yeah, I don't think I was either.
Making it up.
Yeah, me too. It's just
like the teenage thing. I was like, this is how people sound when they've been in therapy. I like didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah, me either. I remember, it's funny.
It was all a scam.
Yeah.
Cheers.
I don't know. I mean, it is that's why, it's so fun and crazy to start so young, because when you're so young, you're like, I know everything. This photo's great, blah, blah, blah. And like, that's what I also always tell people when they're like, what's your best photo advice? I'm like, just don't second guess yourself, because I didn't second guess myself. And that applies to sort of everything in life, is that when you don't let that like negative thought in, you can create so much. It's so crazy what you can make when you're not distracted by like all the horrible things that you can tell yourself. But yeah, I don't know. We were making a lot of it up, literally.
No, but I do think that's a very good thing to take with you. Like, you can poke holes in anything, whether you're trying to think of an idea, story, a point of view. Like, I'm kind of talking about writing, but you can poke holes in anything and have reason to stop at any time, but you have to just know that like the problems or the obstacles are part of it. And but I do think, like, for you to say that, it does make me think of how with this book, like, your growth as an artist and your growth as a person are so integrated. And it's amazing, especially at a time when we're like constantly contending with learning that artists we like may have used their artistic success or persona to not grow as a person, or to maybe even get away with being a kind of bad person. So it's, and I can, I still like watch certain movies made by garbage people. Like, I'm not going to keep that artistic education away from my learning, but it's really nice when you see how the two actually feed each other, and it doesn't actually help your work to be like, I'm going to be like an asshole and, like a Daniel Day-Lewis character or something. I don't know. Saw his new movie last night. Yeah. But that's nice of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just really wanted to say that I'm like really glad that you used your book as a way to kind of touch on mental illness, at least within kind of how it's in the way related to your creative process. It's not necessarily, one isn't necessarily indicative of the other, but like everyone has this kind of, or knows this myth of like the tortured artist and like is using their pain as a way to kind of like put forth their art and have a vehicle for their creativity. But what I really loved about your writing is that it wasn't necessarily, a way for you to combat things just so much as discover it along the way, just making it up, because that's, what pretty much all artists do. And I just wanted to, I think like with a lot of the creative mind has to mix together the things that they constantly ingest, whether it's like media and books they read, and then also kind of using their own traumas as a way to kind of go into those things and discover themselves that way. But then point of my question was if you see trauma as kind of a tool to then combine all of the things that you just kind of take in, and then it comes out in a way as to where it's mainly cohesive to you. You don't necessarily have to, explain it to other people, but the intention is there to just kind of work things out. Like how much of like personal hardship is usually, a way to center your ideas and just kind of bring everything together to where it's like, okay, I'm going through this, but I'm also into these things. That has to have some sort of correlation, so therefore I can make this like, sorry, does that make sense? I know I ran.
It makes so much sense, and that was such a beautiful question and such beautiful words, but not but. I was just saying that to say the next. Never but. Such a bad habit. I was about to say but. I guess it's all about your own process too, and like how you process trauma and how you want to, I guess, deal with it. I've been in therapy for a lot of my life, and recently I did some like more intensive work, and a lot of that, I literally just blew a bubble. I don't know if you saw that. Okay. And a lot of, also like I'm making jokes because I'm saying something super serious, which is another thing that is hard not to do. But I guess a lot of that was figuring out how much of that would help and how much of that would hurt, and how much of it, and what those images would look like, and if they would be like negative to people or positive. But I think the way that I've like navigated around it is not creating something out of any negativity. It's always creating something in a positive way. So it's always like, even if I have trauma around something, it's about healing myself and maybe helping other people to heal. Because I don't think that creating work, like you're not going to get out of that, like that bubble of trauma or that bubble of whatever without wanting to get out and wanting to make something positive. The work can be like angry, it can be violent, it can be whatever, but I think the intent has to not be you being stuck in it. And I think that's something that with artists we love to like marinate on. We love to like be broken and be whatever, but it's like you can, as long as you also want to, I think it's important to also want to help others. So I think, does that sort of answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yay.
Any over here?
So you guys both touched on feminism and how female sexuality is portrayed in movies. So I was just kind of wondering, what about the teen girl experience is really special to you? Because I know you focus on that a lot in your work and your photography, and I'm just curious about like the specific aesthetics or things that you focus on, how that really, you know, relates to being a teenage girl. Like, why is being a teenage girl such a special and like weird thing?
I mean, I think it maybe is because it's something that's like not explored. So like when we explore it, it's always like in the craziest way. And that's again why I would turn to a lot of horror movies to like explain my growth, because that's like all I kind of saw. And that, I mean, those are the aesthetics that I really like took on. Because that's how I felt. I felt like literally like a monster. I mean, it's funny because like when I was 12, my body was like the ideal body type for women. So my like prepubescent child body was what I was seeing as what was feminine, what a woman was supposed to be. And then growing up and growing hips or growing whatever, getting pimples, getting hair, whatever it is, it just makes you feel like you're like an absolute alien because you don't see that anywhere. And that really, again, lended to that, my obsession with these horror movies that like explored it in that way. But yeah, I think it's really, I mean, for me, it's really special because it is what I went through, but it is something that isn't, it's like it's so done, and there's so many images and so many movies, but they're very rare. It's very rarely done in something in reality. But a movie that I actually really love that made such an impact on me is this movie called Fat Girl. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's about two sisters and their like sexual kind of puberty and growth together, but everyone should just watch it, and then you're gonna get to the end and be like, yep, that's life. Because I don't want to spoil it, but it's really good and really rough. And that to me was like, again, another thing. Yeah.
Hi, Petra.
Hi.
So I'm a photographer, and I recently moved to New York after graduating high school, and I feel like I'm kind of in this weird limbo phase between like having it as a hobby and making it my job that pays my rent. And as I like start to catch the attention of artists that I've looked up to and like going to galleries and attending events like this, like I guess my question is just, how did you jump that bridge from like I like photos and I'm good at taking them to like this is my job?
I think it's not something that I was ever like, this is my job. I worked retail for so long while I was taking photos, and I think it's more about like loving what you do, and I like needed to do it, so I did it. And yeah, I worked so many random jobs and it wasn't something that I was like necessarily pursuing as a job. It was something that that came because I loved it so much, and that came because I created so many things, and that I've never looked at it as a commodity because it's something that I needed to do. So for me, I never put pressure on it being this thing that had to make me money, because I would never, for me, it doesn't matter if I'm, I don't know, working at whatever. I worked retail for so long. So I was like cashier at a retail store. And as long as I'm able to take photos, that's what's like most important for me. So I think having that mentality is what brought me to where I am. Yeah, because I came from kind of nothing, and I'm always used to like, I'm very like crafty, and I always made sure I was like filling that hole with photography, but I think just looking at what you love and like doing what you love is more important than looking at it as a career. I know it's difficult, but it's something that is necessary, and I think that's something what makes great artists and great people. So yeah.
I'm going to try to squeeze out here. If anybody I pass has a question, just raise your hand. We'll come back to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. I guess I think I have two questions. The first is, was there ever a point where you had to like solidify your style, like you made a decision, or was it always kind of natural for you? And then the second question, I kind of wanted to shed light on this age we're in where toxic masculinity is really coming to light, and kind of see how you would see the end of this chapter ending, even if it's like a science fiction ending. I'm cool with that.
Like of the world? Or wait, what
Sure.
chapter?
Just like the toxic masculinity.
Oh
coming
yeah.
To light and
Ooh, I love that you threw that in there. That it could be like science fictiony. So the first question, it was so crazy. Honestly, I feel like one day I woke up and was like, oh, I have an aesthetic. Honest, like I can't pinpoint, because there was never a point where I was like, I have to do it this way. It was just like I always just do the things in my weird way, and then that just ends up coming from my brain and like doing, I don't know, like I make these decisions based on the people that I'm around and based on like, I don't know, I think I actually have really bad eyesight, and it kind of taught me the way I'm very, very sensitive to light. And so I think that's a big part of my aesthetic too, which is funny that I'm a photographer who can't see, but seriously, I have really bad eyesight. Saying that for like the millionth time. But yeah, it wasn't something that I ever was like, it has to be this way, it has to be this way. I literally was like, oh, I have an aesthetic. It's so crazy. And it was so exciting to learn that. It was just after creating a body of work where I was like, wow, all these connect. And then your second question, I think it's really, I don't know how it's going to end, but I think it's really cool that we're starting to focus on, I think it's an important conversation that we need to start having, because, we do focus a lot on femininity, but we don't focus on how masculinity is taught and how masculinity is treated and how that really affects everything else. I feel like we always forget that there's like, that's a big part of our world. It's like we can blame as much as we want, but the way that we like nurture and treat and like teach and help young men or males or people that I'm literally losing my words, that identify as male, the way that we do that has to be in a way that is positive. It's so crazy because we just like fully ignore it, and I think there's sort of a movement towards changing that. So hopefully it ends in like in something positive, not like a horror, like a science sci-fi movie. But yeah, sorry. I hope that was good enough. Okay.
Anybody else in standing room have a question before I come up the side?
Hi, I was wondering, what are your favorite films to shoot on, color film specifically, and camera, maybe lens?
I actually always literally have bought whatever is cheapest. I'm not being like facetious, but like, I started with like using like drugstore. I mean, now the film isn't sold in drugstores anymore, but I literally go up to the counter. I'm like, what's your cheapest 35 millimeter 400 ISO film? So 400 ISO is maybe like the thing that I stick with, but it doesn't matter because it's all about how I manipulate the light and how I take the photo. But camera wise, it's also the same because I mean, starting at a young age and like I got my cameras at like the thrift stores, and so like I guess a camera that I use is a Minolta X700. That's one that I am constantly buying because I'm constantly breaking, and they're the worst camera because the I don't even know what it's called. The winder, the shutter, that thing, always breaks. But I really, honestly, I know it's like the worst annoying thing to hear, but I think it's like what is behind the camera and what you're feeling and how you deal with the light is what's going to make a great photo. Because I've worked with so many cameras and all my photos look the same. Like the best camera that I've used and the worst camera. So, yeah. That's it.
Hi. I have two questions. One, do you still print in the darkroom? Do you print your colors or your film or not?
I've never printed. I'm really bad at it.
Okay.
And I also like have no level of patience for it. I remember in high school, I got in trouble. I like failed my photo class, but not that that's something to be proud of. I shouldn't be like, I failed my photo class, but but I was like, for anyone who's in photography is gonna like throw up at this, but like the three, I don't even know the names, the like things of chemicals where you put the print in, I wouldn't wait and I'd shake it and move it to the next one and shake it and move it to the next one. And so I have all these prints that are like slowly disintegrating because I didn't do it properly. So I've never printed.
Okay. And my second question is, so obviously femininity and dealing with the male gaze and changing bodies are something that every female continues to go through, like outside of being a teenager. But because you guys aren't teenagers anymore, I'm wondering what your next phase is or what you're interested in now that you're in your 20s and getting older, and now that you've begun to like reconcile with your teenage past,
Yeah.
What are you moving on now? What are you interested in?
I mean, I think it's about just capturing my life as I go and capturing like peers that are my age or women that are older. And I think like, because I was obviously a teenager and that was so part of like my life, my narrative, I think now it's shifting it because it's crazy. There are two parallels with women in media and women in photo is like, we really only let them live in this one certain age, like bubble. And what's interesting for me is like expanding beyond that and being able to, create images outside of that. So for me, I mean, I'm really growing and like figuring out what it is like to be a woman and what it is like to be a woman getting older. So I think that, I mean, that'll just come as I keep taking photos. Yeah.
So this will be our second to last question.
Hi, thank you so much for everything. I feel very safe in this space, like it's something that happens so rarely.
Hey.
And so generally that's what I appreciate in the work that I guess you both do. And so Petra, I particularly appreciate how you bring in different aesthetics. It's like, especially you welcome different body traits that were very much generally ignored in American mainstream photography. If you think of like advertisement and then, with the rise of products in the 1950s, etc., and then the arrival of plastic surgery and generally the idea of like having to be normative in order to be part of American mainstream media, at least in a visual way. And so because American media gets exported in many parts of the world, and I know that you have, I think you're European originally, you obviously spent a lot of time in Canada, and those are places that obviously, I think especially Canada, where I spent a lot of time as well, it's a place that's particularly drawn to American media, but feels a certain distance. And a lot of like incredible artists like Justin Bieber is Canadian. A lot of people in American mainstream media are Canadian, and I think it's a result of that admiration and degree of like strange envy and being an outsider. So I wonder if you think about how your images move outside of, you know, the sort of like sphere in the U.S. That we are very much surrounded by in New York. But because I know you seem to have this consciousness of other worlds, do you think of your images as these artifacts that travel and that somehow change the way, you know, this very normative image of American culture with like the blonde housewife in a detached dwelling in a suburban house under sunny sun? And I think that's maybe also what the Selena Gomez clip was starting to, for me at least, that's how I read it. So I was just wanting to hear your thoughts on this reading of your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool for me as a Canadian. I mean, it's funny because Canada's so close, but it's so different. And I remember, I mean, I grew up in Toronto, which is like so culturally aware and so positive. And so, I mean, I went to an art school that like is like literally like a safe space. It's every single person is accepted and you just grow up with that. And so when I moved to America, I was so like, I was like, oh, I'm living in a bubble that just doesn't exist in the rest of the world. And also living in a sort of art bubble too, which is why I think it was cool and important. I mean, obviously I do commercial work as to live and to make money, but it also, I realized it was such an important space to create change in, because we live in this capitalist world. So it's like, I'm going to be part of it. But like, if I can take one little thing from the campaign that I'm making and create some sort of tiny shift, it's like what's so exciting and important to me. So I don't know if that necessarily answered your question, but like also with working with Selena and working with artists that have such a big reach, it's cool to do something that maybe has their audience start to question things or start to, I don't know, think a different way, because I feel like to change the world or to change things, you kind of have to do it from the inside. And it's been really cool being able to do that. Yeah.
Do one last question from over here.
Hi. So I'm a teenage girl, and I was wondering how, well, as both of you grew up, how you felt like, I know that you struggled, or I was reading your book, and how you struggled with body image, and I was wondering how you guys both overcame that.
We still struggle with it, which is like the hardest thing to tell. I was just watching, I don't know if anyone watches BoJack Horseman, but the newest season where he is this horse. I don't know if you've seen it, but he's this horse and he tells he's just this horse, but he has this like teenage daughter who's 17, and she's like, do those horrible thoughts in your head that tell you that you're not worth it go away? And he kind of goes, yeah, but is lying. But I mean, they do and they don't, and you just have to learn how to. It's such a long, intense process, but the fact that you're aware of it is the most important thing. And that's what sort of gets you through, because it's hard to not succumb to these like shaming things that you want to say to yourself and want to look at yourself. But when you're aware that you are doing that is what will start to set that change. And it's cool that you even just asked that, because like that's what you're going to look at the next time you look at yourself and are like, ugh, my skin, ugh, whatever. You'll then slowly realize that you're doing it. I literally did it today before I got here and told everyone about it. It was like my skin and whatever. I spent like an hour looking in the mirror, and then finally I had to, it's stupid at the end of the day. There's so much more you can do with that time that's not spent in front of the mirror and not spent worrying about, like, I could have literally directed a movie by now if I didn't spend that time on like hating my body, hating my skin, also like hating other girls too. Like it just, I think maybe like the time thing is the most important. You could like really do a lot with that.
I also want to add that something switched in my brain around that stuff when I like was in another country at their airport and saw other tabloids with the pictures of people I had never seen in my life, but they're like, you know, that country's equivalent of Britney Spears or whatever. And I was like, oh, there are different types of media all over the world, and now because of the internet, you can curate your experience of the world. Sometimes that is not a good thing, but in the case of like the images you surround yourself with, and body image especially, it's amazing. Like if you're kind of curating your feed to be positive, then the other stuff kind of doesn't exist. I mean, it's always there in the outside world, but your environment can kind of slowly brainwash you into seeing a different kind of beauty. And I mean, now we live in a time where like, this is the first time when what's designated for teenagers is actually made by other teenagers. That never happened before. Like movies, MTV, everything for teens was by adults. And now you can kind of cut those forces out, except for Rookie, and just make your own version of the world, which is great.
Thank you all so much for your question, and thank you so much to Petra and Tavi.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.